Thank you so much, Ambassador Battle, for finding time to
It's a pleasure to be here with
talk
you.
to us. I'm going to jump straight to in and talk about the PPP initiatives. What has the U.S. government via the U.S. Embassy in Dar es Salaam, what support has it given to Tanzania?
You know, in the last 20 years alone, without going back further than that, we have given over 7.5 billion US dollars. And what is unique about US contributions is we have not left Tanzania in debt. We've not made these as loans. These are gifts and these are development projects. And we've historically done that, in part because we feel an obligation to engage when it comes to development and aid. Now, I am trying, because it is my perspective, that over time we have to transition from an aid and development orientation to a trade and investment orientation. Right. And just last week, we announced that we are providing 320 million US dollars to CRBD Bank here in Tanzania, right, to allow CRBD Bank to be able to take more risk in the loans that it gives to young businesses. Or a grant? Well, that's a guarantee. We are guaranteeing the loan. Right. So what happens is, if, for example, you take out a loan with CRBD Bank, but our money, they don't take as much of a risk because they know that if, God forbid, you fail to pay the loan, right, we're going to pay it for you. Okay. And so what we're doing is we're setting aside $320 million in order to allow the bank to be more secure and to de-risk some of its loans, because that kind of private investment allows for Tanzania's economy to grow. So when you look at public-private joint activities, that's the only way to go toward the future. Tanzania cannot, no country can, afford through government programs to sustain itself with large populations. The U.S. cannot do so. In fact, I was at a meeting about a year or so ago, and two of our prominent senators made the statement that now is the time that even the Senate of the United States is looking at philanthropic organizations to help us do some of the things that historically the government simply did. So if the U.S. cannot do it by itself without public-private partnership, Tanzania certainly cannot do it without public-private.
Do you think Tanzania is ready for that?
I think Tanzania is ready because Tanzania must be. You know, there are times that we talk about how necessity is the mother of all invention. So necessity is also often the mother of growth. Julius Nyerere talked about socialism, but he clearly said that socialism for him was a principle, it was a concept that he was willing to use as long as it worked. But he also acknowledged toward the end of his death, and that's why some of the presidents who followed him recognized that there was a necessity to move toward a free market economy, where you could have a blending of socialism and a free market economy simultaneously without them contradicting each other. And I think that's the brilliance of Tanzania. Even the brilliance of Tanzania's constitution. In your constitution, it says over and over that it is a socialist, democratic, multi-party state. Now, if you were to back away from that and look at it simply as a philosophical construct, one would think that those are contradictions. But the reason they're not contradictions is because Tanzania sees the socialism as a responsibility of the state for its people. Right. And the reason it allows now for free market enterprise is because free market enterprise and public-private partnership is what makes Tanzania more able to take care of its people. And without that, Tanzania would not be able to do so.
Right, you've talked about these grants and loans that the U.S. has been supporting Tanzania. I'm going to ask you again if Tanzania is really ready to stand on its own feet without depending on these loans and, you know, support from the U.S.
On one's own feet is a misguided concept. Nobody stands completely on their own feet. The U.S. does not stand completely on its own feet. We stand in partnership with other people. That's why we are in the NATO alliance. That's why we are in the G7. That's why we're in the United Nations. That's why we're in the group of American states that goes from Canada through South America. Nobody stands on its own. The notion of total independence is a misguided concept because we're all humans. We need each other. I need you and you need me. And for you to be able to say that you will stand independent from your connection with me, I'm talking about the universal me, not the personal me. For you to be able to assert that you could stand independently from the universal me is delusional. So to expect that Tanzania will be able to stand on its own without its partnerships. Now, Tanzania prides itself in being a non-aligned state. Yeah. The reality is that Tanzania is not non-aligned, it's multiply aligned. Right. So Tanzania has alliances with India, it has alliances with China, it has alliances with the US, it has alliances with the EU, with SADC, with EAC, with the African Union. But what Tanzania refuses to do, and should continue to refuse to do, is to let any one of those isolated alliances become the comprehensive definition of who and what Tanzania is. That again is the uniqueness of Nyereri's philosophy.
Right. Let's go back to health. The US government is supporting the youth-led initiatives to promote not only HIV prevention, but treatment in Tanzania. How is the US doing that?
Well, you know, PEPFAR is one of the largest programs that we have in health here in Tanzania. It not only addresses HIV/AIDS, if you look at during the time of COVID, we were given the flexibility to shift some attention and funding to help address COVID. We were able to shift just last year some funding with USAID as a partner with PEPFAR to address Marlboro. We are willing now even to assist as we can if mpox were to ever break out here in Tanzania, as it has broken out in some other areas. The flexibility to shift, because the bottom line concept is that we're trying to enable healthier lives of Tanzanian people. So we address malaria. We address a number of illnesses, because the reality again is that most illnesses are not isolated, compartmentalized. There are always other relationships between one illness and the next illness, which makes it easy for us to be flexible with the utilization of funding. This year alone, we are spending over $350-some million in Tanzania on the PEPFAR program by itself. And none of that money will Tanzania ever have to pay back. We are energizing people, we're providing jobs for people. I was talking to some people yesterday, and I never thought about the economic impact of the embassy by itself. We provide over 550 jobs in the embassy alone for Tanzanians, and they are good paying jobs. These are jobs for people who are from the level of working in our maintenance shop to people who have MD degrees. Who are working actively and constructively in the embassy by itself. So that 550 jobs by itself is an economic impact. Then when you loop that together with what we're doing through PEPFAR, and just last week I was in Arusha, where we were announcing that we're taking a $2 million grant from USAID and coupling that with an additional $18 million in private funding to create a $20 million investment in helping to prevent food waste and food loss after harvesting. And we're doing that kind of thing throughout Tanzania.
All right. With PEPFAR this year, it expanded its Dreams initiative and came up with Enabling Dreams here in Tanzania. How is this, how are these services touching, you know, young adults, to adults as well?
Yeah, I met Sunday night. I hosted at my house the 10 young people who are on the planning committee to make this Congress take place. And in conversation with some of those young people, with no specificity to who they are, there were young people who, because of stigma about having HIV/AIDS, were exited to be nicely from their home and the support. Dreams allows for these young people to be able to know that they have a future, that they have hope, that there's promise for them, no matter what their background is. And people who are being forced to work in the street to make a living because they are stigmatized by having HIV/AIDS. And we're trying to help them overcome the stigma and to live with the reality that the stigma does not have to be imposed upon them, because they can have enough internal resilience to be strong and to be forceful and to make contributions to life, even with HIV/AIDS. For example, there are millions of people in this world who have cancer. Yeah. Cancer is deadly in many instances. They're not stigmatized for having cancer. It's a disease. AIDS is a disease. It's an immunocompromising disease. So there's no logical reason for a person who happens to have a disease to be stigmatized by that disease, especially when many of the young people contracted HIV/AIDS not because of behavior of their own. They contracted it because their parent had it and it was transmitted. But we're able now to prevent most maternal to child transmission of HIV. And I think that's one of the strongest things that PEPFAR has been able to do. There are women now who have HIV who are having healthy children without any a trace of the disease. And we need to celebrate that.
Do you think we're going to hit the target for 2030 where HIV epidemic becomes, to end HIV, it becomes no longer becomes a public health threat?
I think in some places
with 5 years, with COVID interrupting in the between.
Right. I think in some places we're going to hit the target. In some countries, we're not going to hit the target. I think Tanzania, we will hit the target. Hitting the target is not my fear. My fear is that after we hit the target of 95, 95, 95, right, in about 2030, and HIV/AIDS is no longer classified as a public health threat, if Tanzania does not then step up to the plate with sustainability, working with the public health system in Tanzania and with private partners, we will run the danger of slipping back. We'll run the danger of creating an environment where there are new cases without treatment. Part of what PEPFAR provides is the treatment for people. So the government now has to step up in order to fill the gap as PEPFAR and other support systems begin to wane, as they necessarily should. So what we're doing over the next 6 years is we're working closely with the government, closely with the Minister of Health, and also closely with private enterprises here in Tanzania to say that we want to help you reach upon a sustainability so that after 2030, we don't then slide back down, that this horrific disease becomes again a public threat in Tanzania. That's why you in the media and the young people that we're working with today have a responsibility and an obligation to help the government and to help the institutions of Tanzania beyond the government to be faithful to sustainability.
Yeah. How important are gatherings like these, the Tanzania Health Summit?
They're important because they galvanize ideas, they galvanize concepts. They recognize, like the Minister of Health from Zanzibar made a brilliant statement last night, and I told him that I was going to quote him, and I'll give him credit the first time. After that, I'm going to act like I said it. But what he said was that, that none of us are going to be right all the time, but all of us can learn from the times that we were wrong. I think that's really the critical point, that gatherings like this help us to assess and analyze where we have been right and where we have missed the boat, and then how do we course correct in the instances that we have missed the boat, so that in the future we won't miss that same boat, even though we will probably miss another. So gatherings like this, they energize, they galvanize, they allow us to listen to each other and to learn from each other, and then hopefully to grow, particularly with young people. When you could tap a generation of enthused, dynamic, power-driven young people in the right direction, it will shape the trajectory of the country for years and years to come.